Good morning and welcome to our video on religion. We're going to get started today by looking at an overview of some of the key religions in the United States and the world. We'll do a religion quiz together. We'll take a little bit of a closer look at religion through a video presentation, do some case studies, and then we'll turn it over to your peers for their cultural strategies presentation. So let's go ahead and get started. I'll make this bigger for you guys. So here we go. My first question for you when it comes to religion in the United States is, what are the top 5 religious groups? I've given you some clues here. There are 7 groups listed here. I need you to pick the top 5, and then if you could put them in order of the most dominant to the least dominant. I'll give you a second to do that. Okay, remember you have the choice of Roman Catholic, Jewish, Protestant, Hindu, Buddhist, Muslim, or other Christian. What are the top 5? All right, let's go ahead and look at that. I'll give you a picture of a chart here that will rank them in order, and let's see how close you were. If we look at our chart here, surprisingly, the most dominant is Protestant. I would have initially guessed Roman Catholic, but Protestant is almost double Roman Catholic, or actually is more than double Roman Catholic. Other Christian is the third most dominant. Then we have Jewish, Buddhist, Muslim, Hindu, and then other religions make up the next category. But we have 12% of the population that do not identify as religious. We have 2.5% that identify as agnostic, and 1.6% that identify as atheist. And we're going to learn a little bit more about the difference between those two in our quiz that we're going to do here in just a minute. So looking at this chart, is anyone surprised by the religious groups in the U.S. and how they break out? I have to admit I was a little bit surprised. As I said, I thought Roman Catholic would be bigger. But let's go ahead and look at the religious groups around the world. Do you think they mirror what we have in the United States, or is it a little bit different breakdown? Well, let's take a look. World religions. Now they've kind of grouped all the Christians together. Catholics are more dominant than Protestants around the world. And then we have Orthodox, Anglicans, and other Christians all kind of grouped together there. Worldwide, the second largest after the Christians would be the Muslims, and then the Hindus. Then we have our other religious and non-religious are pretty close together. Atheists and Buddhists are smallest percentages here, besides the Jews, Ziyas, and the Bahá'ís. So I hope you find this interesting, kind of comparison between the U.S. religions and the world religions. Now we're going to take a little bit closer look at what you know about religions around the world. And what we're going to do is go and complete a quiz together. Now I'm going to take you to the website and we'll actually do the quiz at the same time. What I would like you to do is just keep track of your answers. So you can actually write down the answer. You don't need to write down the question, but you can write down your answer or just note whether or not you got it right or wrong. There are 32 questions total, so please find a scratch piece of paper where you can write down 1 through 32. And as you document your answers, maybe circle it if you got it correct or put an X on it if you got it wrong. Because at the end, we're going to kind of compare how you did on the quiz to the national norm on the quiz. All right, so let's get started. I'm going to escape out of this so we can go to our quiz. And we're going to start over here with our quiz. If you went to the website, this is what it'd pull up. You can actually do it online if you'd like, because we do this together, or we can just kind of finish it or work on it together. Again, if you want to go to the website and do this with me as we do it, here's the website, www.flashbynight.com/religion quiz. slash. All right, so let's get started. The first question, when does the Jewish Sabbath begin? Is it on Thursday, Saturday, Sunday, or Friday? Okay, the correct answer is Friday. Question 2, what is Ramadan? Is it the Buddhist festival of peace, the Hindu festival of lights, a Jewish day of atonement, or the Islamic holy month? If you selected the Islamic holy month, you would be correct. Okay, which of these is the king of gods in ancient Greek mythology? Is it Hercules, Zeus, Mars, or Apollo? If you selected Zeus, you are correct. Next question. Which of these religions aims at nirvana, the state of being free from suffering? Is it Hinduism, Islam, Buddhism, or Christianity? If you selected Buddhism, you would be correct. Okay, next question. In which religion are Vishnu and Shiva considered central figures? Is it Taoism, Hinduism, Christianity, or Islam? If you selected Hinduism, you'd be correct. Let's go to our next question. What is an atheist? Remember, this was a term we saw on our graphs for the U.S. religions around the world as well as the world religions. We have atheists around the U.S. and the world. So is an atheist someone who believes in God, someone who is unsure whether God exists, someone who does not believe in God, or someone who does not go to church? If you selected someone who does not believe in God, you would be correct. So an atheist does not believe in God. Now we're going to compare that with an agnostic. What is an agnostic? Is an agnostic someone who believes in God, someone who is unsure whether God exists, someone who does not go to church, or someone who does not believe in God? An agnostic is someone who is unsure whether God exists. So when we look at atheist, is someone who does not believe in God, and agnostic is someone who is unsure whether God exists. Let's go to our next question. Where, according to the Bible, was Jesus born? If you select Bethlehem, you are correct. Okay, and when was the Mormon religion founded? The options are nobody knows, sometime after 1800, between 1200 and 1800, and before 1200 AD. Okay, if you selected sometime after 1800, you'd be correct. It's one of our newer religions, I would say. All right, next question. The Book of Mormon tells the story of Jesus appearing to people in what area of the world? So in the Book of Mormon, did Jesus appear to people in the Americas, Asia, the Middle East, or Australia? You selected the Americas. You are correct. Okay, the next one. Which of the following best describes Catholic teaching about the bread and wine used for communion? First option, the bread and wine actually become the body and blood of Jesus Christ. The bread and wine are symbols of the body and blood of Jesus Christ. The bread and wine are symbols of the compassion and love of Jesus Christ. This one can be a little bit tricky, but it's the first one is the correct answer. The bread and wine actually become the body and blood of Jesus Christ. Okay, next, which of these religious groups traditionally teaches that salvation comes through faith alone? This is only Catholics, neither Protestant nor Catholics, only Protestants, are both Protestants and Catholics. If you selected only Protestants, you would be correct. Okay, next one. Which of the following is not one of the 10 commandments? Do not steal, keep the Sabbath holy, do unto others as you would have them do unto you, or do not commit adultery. If you selected do unto others as you would have them do unto you, that is correct. That is not one of the 10 commandments. All right, next one. Which Bible figure is most closely associated with remaining obedient to God despite suffering? Is it Abraham, Job, Elijah, or Moses? If you selected Job, you'd be correct. For our next one. Which Bible figure is most closely associated with leading the Exodus from Egypt? Would that be Job, Elijah, Moses, or Abraham? If you selected Moses, you would be correct. Remember, he parted the Red Sea to help them escape. Which Bible figure is most closely associated with willingness to sacrifice his son for God? Was that Job, Abraham, Elijah, or Moses? If you selected Abraham, you'd be correct. Okay, let's go to our next question. Mother Teresa was Jewish, Hindu, Catholic, or Mormon? If you selected Catholic, you'd be correct. Okay, the Dalai Lama is Jewish, Hindu, Buddhist, or Mormon? Okay, if you selected Buddhist, you'd be correct. All right, Joseph Smith was Catholic, Buddhist, Jewish, or Mormon? If you selected Mormon, you'd be correct. Maimonides was Buddhist, Catholic, Jewish, or Hindu? If you selected Jewish, you'd be correct. And hopefully I pronounced that right. Okay, which of the following best describes what the U.S. Constitution, including amendments, says about religion? Is it A, the government shall neither establish a religion nor interfere with the practice of religion? Is it Christianity should be given special emphasis by the government? Or the Constitution does not say anything one way or another about religion? Okay, Okay, the correct answer is the government shall neither establish a religion nor interfere with the practice of religion. And we'll learn a little bit more about the Constitution's specific laws here in just a moment. Okay, according to the rulings by the U.S. Supreme Court, is a public school teacher permitted to lead a class in prayer? Is it no, only on Saturdays, yes, or only on Fridays? If you selected no, you are correct. Okay, next question. Which religion do most people in India consider themselves? Is it Christian, Muslim, Buddhist, or Hindu? Okay, is Hindu. According to rulings by the Supreme Court, is a public school teacher permitted to read from the Bible as an example of literature? Your options are only on Fridays, yes, no, and only on Saturdays. You selected yes, you are correct. And next question. According to rulings by the U.S. Supreme Court, is a public school teacher permitted to offer a class comparing the world's religions? Your options are only in Texas, yes, only in Florida, or no. You selected yes, you are correct. Okay, just a few more questions here. Next one, which religion do most people in Indonesia consider themselves? Is it Muslim, Christian, Buddhist, or Hindu? You selected Muslim, you are correct. Okay, next question. Which religion do most people in Pakistan consider themselves? Is it Hindu, Christian, Buddhist, or Muslim? You selected Muslim, you are correct. Next question. What was the name of the person whose writings and actions inspired the Protestant Reformation? Was it Martin Luther, John Wesley, Thomas Aquinas, or we don't know? You selected Martin Luther, you are correct. Okay, which of these preachers participated in the period of religious activity known as the First Great Awakening? Was it Charles Finney, Billy Graham, Jonathan Edwards, or John the Baptist? Okay, if you selected Jonathan Edwards, you would be correct. All right, so next one, what is the name of the holy book of Islam? Is it Al-Quran, the Bible, Islam's holy book, or the Hadith? You selected Al-Quran, you're correct. What is the first book of the Bible? Is it the New Testament, Genesis, the book of Exodus, or the Old Testament? If you selected Genesis, you are correct. All right, now our last question here on our quiz. What are the names of the first 4 books of the New Testament of the Bible, or the 4 Gospels? Is it Matthew, James, Luke, and John? Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John? Jude, James, Timothy, and Luke? Jude, James, Luke, and John? Okay, if you selected Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, you'd be correct. All right, so now take a moment to add up your score, figure out how many you got correct and how many you had incorrect. Well, I move us back to our presentation here. So I'm going to skip over here. Okay. So let's go back to our presentation. And depending on your score, I just want to give you some facts about this. The Pew Center Research Center carried out a survey of religious knowledge using a 32-question quiz, like the one we just took. The average member of public scored 16, while surprisingly, atheists and agnostics outperformed most religious groups with an average of 20.9. Jews and Mormons also scored 20.5 and 20.3 on average. Surprisingly, to me at least, Catholics scored 14.7 on average. So were you above or below average as indicated here? So you've kind of determined if you're below or above average. I just want you to reflect a little bit on the quiz itself. So what insights did you gain about yourself and your knowledge about religion? Did your quiz results surprise you? Why or why not? And then how am I to use the information you learned from completing the quiz to inform your future professional practice when it comes to religion? So take a minute to think about those questions before we move on. All right, so we've kind of assessed your knowledge and background when it comes to religion. Now we're going to look at some critical court cases and the impact they had. So what I'd like you to do, you're not going to take notes on a mini novella, but I'd just like you to take a few notes on just a blank sheet of paper about some of the insights you gain based on these critical cases. You will need to have at least a few notes on this because for the flip grid, I will ask you to provide some information about your insights. So let's go ahead and listen to some critical court cases.
Hey guys, welcome to Hip Hughes History. We're going to take a look at the Establishment Clause of the First Amendment today and how it applies to schools. There's a number of Supreme Court cases that you're going to want to know about, whether you're an AP government course or whether you're just sitting in school wondering it. Maybe you're one of those cray-cray on the internet people. I don't care. Giddy up for the learning. Let's get her done right now. Congress shall make no law respecting the establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. Those are the words, kiddies. And the Supreme Court has been dealing with those words really since the 1940s as that applies to what schools can do and what students have in terms of free expression rights in their schools dealing with religious issues. So we're going to take a look at those court cases, but you would notice that I didn't say anything about church and state because it's not in the amendment. And before we move on, because the Supreme Court's going to point to Jefferson's words, it's Thomas Jefferson in a letter to the Danbury Baptist Association in 1802, where he writes about really religion being a relationship between man and God, and that government really has no business in it. And then he goes on to say that really the true spirit of the Establishment Clause is to build a wall between church and state. So that's where that language comes from the founding father himself, but it's not in the Constitution. So here we go, guys. Let's break it up a little bit and take a look at the important court cases that you're going to want to know about. So as we dive into these cases, it's important to realize that these are all court cases that are utilizing not just the First Amendment, and again, we're breaking this up into the Establishment Clause, respecting the establishment of religion, and the Free Exercise Clause, and the free exercise thereof. So there's kind of two different variables that are going into the pot here, but the other important variable is going to be the 14th Amendment, no state shall deny its citizens life, liberty, or due process. That's the kind of the hook that brings in the states into this fold, because without without the 14th Amendment, it would purely be a federal viewpoint. We'd only be looking at actions taken by the United States federal government. But because of the 14th Amendment, the court's going to be selectively incorporating kind of these issues with the 14th Amendment under the umbrella of the Establishment Clause and the Free Exercise Clause. That's a lot of words there, kiddies. So let's take a look at some court cases. The first court case is actually not purely religion, but in 1943 we have West Virginia Board of Education versus Barnett. And this really is the free exercise portion of that language when it's talking about whether students have the right not to be coerced into saying the Pledge of Allegiance, putting their hand over their heart, or saluting. So while not religious in nature purely, it was brought forth by Jehovah's Witnesses who are using this free exercise clause argument to say, you can't make us do this. It's violating my free exercise of my religion. And the court agrees, and that's why it's a voluntary kind of thing. So if your school is telling you, you have to say it, I don't want to get you in trouble, Johnny, but you wouldn't get in trouble at the end of the day because the Constitution is on your side. Now, the first selective incorporation case when it comes to the Establishment Clause, and you want to write this one down, this is a big one, is going to be Everson Board of Education versus Ewing Township, 1947. And this is a court case that deals with New Jersey that is using the money, tax money that's coming in, to basically use for transportation to private schools. And the taxpayers are saying, well, whoa, wait a minute, you're taking my money, this is government money, and you're spending it on this kind of religious endeavor. That's Establishment Clause. And while the court doesn't agree, the court's going to uphold this law. They're going to say that, the purpose of the law has nothing to do with religion. It's just kind of a consequence of the law. They are in agreement that there is a wall between church and state. It's just that the wall doesn't cover this one activity. But that's going to change quite quickly. It's going to change in 1948, where we have McCollum versus Board of Education. And McCollum is the first instance where the court's going to say, yeah, you kind of hit the wall there, baby. And what we have is basically Illinois, which is allowing in their public schools for religious people to come in during the day and basically to provide religious instruction. So while the state's not providing it, they're inviting them in, they're giving them the class space, and the students are receiving this instruction. And the court says that violates the Establishment Clause. There's just too much endorsement of religion when you go to a specific religious group and you invite them into this public sphere. So they're going to knock that down. And then in 1952 in New York City, there's a Zorak versus Clausen, where New York kind of got around that by saying, well, we'll just have kind of a release day. So if you have a special religious holiday, we'll give you an exemption. They can take attendance as you leave the building and go to your church or synagogue or whatever it might be. And in that court case, using this kind of test of whether or not the government's endorsing religion Establishment Clause, the court says, no, that's okay. So all of these court cases are kind of trying to find that height of where that wall between church and state is. And you can see that it's kind of going up and down as we go through these different court cases. But here's the big one, and this is the one that upsets a lot of people. It's probably the most famous court case. That means it's going to be on the test, children. And that's Engel versus Vitale, 1962. Write it down. If you're cheating, write it on your hand. Do whatever kids do. But this is the big guy. And it's actually New York, and there's 10 families that have come together that are protesting what is basically a state-sponsored prayer in New York, where New York would write a supposedly non-denominational prayer that would say something to the effect of, our Heavenly Father, bless us, or something that is kind of not very religious specific, but it's specific enough that the court's going to knock it down. The court's going to say that, this is coercion, that you're basically saying that we're going to tell you when to pray and what to say, and you have to do it. Or at least you're being made that you have to feel that you have to do it. If you're 5 years old, you're not going to be like, I ain't saying the prayer, man. Where's my lawyer? So the court says that's going to kind of violate that wall. It's just too much. The school having devotional religious exercises, that's not the place. That's the place for the private sphere, not the public sphere. Now, the last case in the 1960s before we hit a big one, we're going to get to that in a second, is going to be Epperson versus Arkansas. And what Arkansas basically did is they passed a law which forbade the teaching of evolution. I ain't going to teach you evolution anymore. Ugh. And there's basically people going, that's, a religious decision. You're not making your curriculum guidelines based on science and education. You're basically saying, this is my religious point of view, and we have enough people in the state democratically who believe in it, so we want you to teach that way. The court says that's an endorsement of a religious belief. That's not secular, that's not non-denominational. You have a purpose here, and we ain't going to let you do it. So they get to teach about the monkeys. So there you go, guys. Those are the court cases that are before the Lemon Test. And right about now, you're like, Mr. Hughes, what's the Lemon Test?
Come here and learn a lesson from the lovely lemon tree. My son, it's most...
So if you're cheating, it's Lemon versus Kurtzman, 1971. And this is the court case that's going to create the famous Lemon Test that has nothing to do with used automobiles, but it is used to test whether or not a state action is violating that wall between church and state. So basically we have Rhode Island and Pennsylvania that have crafted a school system where Rhode Island is paying private school teachers, religious instructors directly out of their state funds, and Pennsylvania is reimbursing private schools for teacher salaries, transportation costs, textbooks, things like that. And basically we're testing whether or not this violates, the Establishment Clause. Have Pennsylvania and Rhode Island gone too far? The court basically says, yes, you have gone too far. But before I tell you why you went too far, let's set up some guidelines so we have something to use in the future, so we don't have to keep having a million court cases. So they say, this is what we're going to do in the future. If we have some kind of school rule or state law, we're going to say, number one, is the purpose of this legislative act secular? If they're trying to pass a law that's trying to say, Christianity is the best, or Buddhism is the baby, that makes no sense. That's not secular. So number one, is it secular? And they say Pennsylvania and Rhode Island, it was a secular law. It wasn't trying to, really do anything for these religious institutions other than reimburse them with state money. And then number two, it says, is this legislative act either inhibiting or advancing religion? And they say, we're not going to get into this, but in the future, we're going to look at that. If we can tell that you're trying to advance Judaism, or you're trying to say, Buddhists beware, you're not going to be able to do that. But this is the one that Pennsylvania and Rhode Island violated that we're going to put in the Lemon Test. It's excessive entanglement. We don't want the state, this is what the court says, we don't want the state kind of having its hands all inside the church working with each other, because it's just too political and there's just too much kind of history in the United States that we don't want to develop into that type of society. So yes, it does violate that. But that's the Lemon Test. Is it secular, advance, or inhibit? Is there excessive entanglement? And now there's a few court cases we're going to look at really quick until we get to the 1990s. And the first one is a free exercise clause case, and this is Wisconsin versus Yoder. This is 1972, and this has to do with the Amish that are saying it's part of our religious belief that we don't think that children should have to go to school after 8th grade. We want to put them to work, we want to keep them home, and the state says, whoa, we have a very legitimate state purpose here. We need an educated citizenry. You got to go to school. And the court says, no. This is where it really gets kind of, controversial, but at the end of the day, this is the most important thing to these people is their religion, and it's a religious belief. It's their free exercise, and we're not going to take away their free exercise of their religion. So if you're Amish, it's 8th grade, you don't got to go anymore. Stone versus Graham, Kentucky, 1980, and what they did in Kentucky is they passed a law putting up the 10 Commandments in all the schools. And there's a number of students, a number of families who are offended by this and go to the court and say, you can't do that. And the district is saying, look, it's just a historical document. We're just putting this up as part of our history, the 10 Commandments and kind of where our civilization came from. And what the court says is, that's not going to fly. You're trying to advance Christianity. You're not putting up, all the other religious documents. You chose that one because you believe that one's the best and you want all the kids to know about it. It's not a curricular thing. It's a religious thing. The 10 Commandments are not supposed to be posted in public schools. We have Wallace versus Jeffries in 1985. Basically, Alabama is kind of trying to get around Engel. They want school prayer real bad. So the court was allowing moments of meditation. If someone passed away, moments of silence, that kind of thing was okay. What Alabama did was they passed a legislative act that said we're going to add meditation, moment of silence, or prayer. They want prayer. They want it in there, and the court says, we know what you're trying to do. You're trying to get prayer in there, and prayer is just too religious It's too controversial. It goes, over that wall. We don't want it to, so we're going to knock that down. And Alabama's law was struck down. And then in 1987, we have a court case which is Edwards versus Gallard, and this is Louisiana, trying to get around Epperson. If you remember Epperson, I was like, you can't teach evolution. Well, the court said, yeah, you're going to teach evolution. So what Louisiana did is said, well, okay, then if you're going to teach evolution, you're going to teach creationism. They passed the Creationism Act, which said you had to teach creationism as a viable option if you were going to teach evolution, which we disagree with. And the court said, again, this is not a secular law, this is a religious law, and you're trying to advance a certain religious concept. You're not allowed to do that in Louisiana, so it's a no-go. Now, we're going to get into the 1990s, and then we're going to be done. So in 1990, we get a huge court case. It's called Board of Education of West Side Community School versus Mergens. And what was going on here was the students came together and they decided that they wanted to have a religious club. They wanted a Bible club. So they started their Bible club. Somebody complained, and we're going to the court, baby. Can students have religious clubs, political clubs even? And what the court says is yes, with a caveat, a little exclamation point, not an exclamation, an asterisk. And here are the rules, basically. Number one, it has to be student-led. This can't be a faculty endeavor. The students have to come together on their own. This is free exercise clause. If the school administration and the teachers are putting it together, it's going to violate the establishment clause. This is a really great court case because it's showing the balance between the establishment clause and the free exercise clause. And number two, it says, you can't pay teachers to be there. They have to be there just in a custodial role. They're really not even supposed to participate. They're supposed to kind of watch. And you can't be bringing all religious people in either. But if students want it, and it's not during school hours, and nobody's getting paid to do it, students have that right. But that means if you have a right to start the Bible club, then you have to allow all the other clubs. And you can't start picking and choosing out of popularity, because then we get into advancing and inhibiting religion. So that's West Side. That still stands today. That's why there's a lot of schools that have religious clubs. Now, 1992, Lee versus Weissman. Can schools have rabbis or Christian pastors come to graduation and give speeches, even if they're under guidelines? And the court says, no, you can't do that. Because by doing that, even if it's really popular, everybody wants the favorite pastor of the local Bible school to come in and give a big speech. What you're doing is you're coercing people. You're having people that don't want to hear that have to hear that. And in a sense, you are picking that religion. So it's advancing that religion, and therefore you're not allowed to do that. The next one is going to be Santa Fe Independent School District versus Doe. This is year 2000, and this is Texas, baby. And what in Texas they like is they like their football and they like God. And they combine those by having student-led prayer in most school districts. And this is back in the late 1990s, where they would basically have an election where they would nominate somebody that would be the person with the chosen religious prayer, and then they'd be given the mic, and everybody would be led in that prayer. And basically what the court says is, you're not allowed to do that. You're not allowed to do that because, number one, you're politicizing religion. You're having people vote on religion. So does that mean we only get to hear the majority religion? We only get to advance that prayer? What about the religion that came in fifth? Oh, no one's ever going to hear that one. And since the school owns the audio system and they're handing the mic, they're in a sense endorsing, it's not secular, they're advancing a certain religious idea. And to protect the coercion effect from that minority, we're going to knock that down. You're not allowed to do that. The last court case is in 2002. We have Zellman versus Simmons Harris, and this has to do with Cleveland. Cleveland came up with a plan to help their students. In that plan, they could either receive free extra help after school, they would be able to apply to go to a magnet school, or they'd be given money, a voucher. And those vouchers, of course, are paid with taxpayer dollars, and 97% of those vouchers were being used for kids to go to parochial schools, religious schools. So taxpayers in Cleveland are saying, we don't want to pay for someone to go to Bible camp. That's, you using my money. You're endorsing religion. This is establishment of religion. And the court says, would you just stop it? That's not true. This is just free choice. If they choose to go and use that voucher at that place, they can go there. If you want to start the school of, hillbilly temple sciences and get people to go to your school with the voucher, then good for you. But we're not advancing it. We're not inhibiting anybody from doing that. And we're certainly not, endorsing anything. So that's where that stands. We can have vouchers going to private schools. And now we're going to wrap it up. Certainly, there's a lot of other controversial things that the court really hasn't come down on yet. Like right now, if you want to wear religious symbols, some schools try to classify that under the kind of gang concept and say you're not allowed to do that. The lower courts have ruled you have a right if you want to bring rosary beads, or you want to wear a big pent or whatever. If it doesn't disturb instruction, and they're not picking and choosing, you should be allowed to do that. When it comes to religious holidays, the court's been pretty clear on that from the lower court standpoint, that you're not allowed to pick the Christmas tree over the, the Kwanzaa tree. Is there a Kwanzaa tree? But right now, schools aren't really able to do that because it's an endorsement, it's an advancement. Go back to the Lemon Test. Now, I'm done. So what do you think? Now's the time for you to go down and type your opinions down below, because we love comments. Keep it civil, keep it nice, because that's the American way to do things. I'm Johnny Cash. So guys, giddy up for the learning. If you haven't subscribed to Hip Hughes History, you can do that by clicking the big red button there. There's like a million videos. There's like a whole bunch. Or go to www.hiphughes.com where they're all organized, which I'm not very good at. So there you go, guys. We'll see you next time that you press my buttons. And always remember, I say it every time, where attention goes, energy flows.
Okay, I hope you found that interesting. I think it's a good overview of some of the key laws and issues that we need to be aware of as future teachers. So now we're going to see what it is you took away from that video by looking at a few case studies. So we're going to look at some real-life examples in practice, and then I want you to just take some notes on what you would do in these situations, kind of based on what you learned from the video. So our first case study is a 6th grader asking teacher about religious beliefs of historical groups. So Mr. Clark's 6th grade class used a standard reader, which had stories on a wide variety of topics. One passage in the reader involved the first settlers in the New World, and another described Leonardo da Vinci as the human with a creative mind that came closest to the divine touch. Talia Burke, a student in Mr. Clark's class, was interested in the passage about the first settlers and asked how the religious beliefs and practices of these settlers compared to those of the Native American Indians. So if you were Mr. Clark and Talia asked you this question, what would you do? How would you approach it? Take a minute to think about that. Well, in our case study, it says after researching the question, the teacher may explain the answer to Talia in a secular, objective, and non-doctrinal manner, or recommend a book on the subject which is secular, unbiased, and non-doctrinal. So basically, you can answer the question, but make sure you do it in a way that's not going to propose a specific religion. All right, let's look at another case study here. There's a Jewish student asked to explain Hanukkah to class. So Mr. Parker, who is not Jewish, is afraid that he will mischaracterize Hanukkah when he is explaining about holidays. In class, he calls on a Jewish student to see if she would be willing to explain to the class the meaning of Hanukkah. She tries to do so. Later that day, the student tells her mother about the incident, who objects to Mr. Parker. Mr. Parker proposes that the mother come to class and explain Hanukkah. She agrees and comes to school and performs a holiday foods cooking demonstration. So given this situation, what would you do if you were Mr. Parker? Okay. So by asking the student, Mr. Parker singled her out from her peers and made Hanukkah seem too exotic for him to explain. It is also unlikely that many students would have the requisite knowledge to give an accurate answer. By asking the mother, Mr. Parker rightly shifted the burden off the student to an adult. However, he must make sure that the presentation given by the mother is neutral, objective, and fits in with the broader lesson plans concerning the holidays. Better still, Mr. Parker could avail himself of one of the many books about Hanukkah and prepare himself to teach the lesson. So basically, you can have a parent come in and talk about a specific religious holiday in this case, but you have to make sure what they do is presented in a neutral and objective manner and doesn't indoctrinate. Okay, let's look at our last case study here. This is a parent of a 6th grader objects to reading assignment on religious grounds. So Joe Smith, also a student in Mr. Clark's class, showed the reader referenced in the prior scenario to his mother, who became very upset with the passage on Leonardo da Vinci, since she viewed it as contrary to her religious beliefs. Joe's mother asked Mr. Clark to excuse Joe from using the reader. Mr. Clark, unsure of how to respond to Miss Smith's request, went to the principal to seek guidance. So knowing what you learned in the video, and you're Mr. Clark, what would you do when it comes to Miss Smith's request? Well, should Joe be exempted from using the standard reader? The school should not excuse Joe from using the standard reader. However, the school must ensure that the standard reader neither promotes nor opposes religion, and that Joe is merely required to read and discuss the material, and is not required to perform or refrain from performing any act forbidden or mandated by his religion. So hopefully these case studies gave you some good insight about situations you might encounter in schools and what you should do. I have one last video I want to show you. It talks a little bit more about public schools teaching religion and should it happen or should it not. And it's not really teaching religion, it should be teaching about religion. So let's go ahead and as you watch this video, once again, jot down a couple of notes and see what you might be able to apply to your future professional practice. So let's watch here our last video. Here we go.
2015, a Tennessee state legislator introduced a bill that would change religious studies teaching standards in Tennessee schools. Responding to some parents' concerns that their kids are being indoctrinated by Islamic teaching, the bill mandates that students cannot be taught religious studies classes before grade 10, in order to protect young children from feeling conflicted with what they are taught at home versus what they learn at school. The bill also mandates that the State Board of Education will ensure that no religion being taught in any history or geography class will ever amount to any sort of indoctrination. But what amounts to indoctrination? Does teaching the theology of Islam, Buddhism, or Hinduism really making Tennessee kids that conflicted? Now, some scholars have proposed mandatory religious studies classes for American public schools. But obviously, judging from this Tennessee bill, this is very controversial. So the question remains, are religious studies classes in public schools a good idea? And if not, what should we do about the growing religious illiteracy in our society? In a previous video, I talk about the growth of religion in the 21st century. Pew Research has found that religious groups are projected to grow as a share of the global population by 2050. Islam in particular is projected to experience the most growth. Now, a lot of this is based on other population growth and fertility factors. Some of the most secular countries on earth are already below population replacement levels, so it's not like everyone is suddenly converting to religion. There are a lot of factors at work here. But interestingly, another phenomenon is happening at the same time. Even though religious groups are growing worldwide, most people simply don't know anything about religion, or even their own religion. Now, I'm going to focus on the United States in this video just as an example. About 40% of Americans can't name the first book of the Bible. Only half of Americans know that the Quran is the holy book of Islam. Less than half know that the Dalai Lama is a Buddhist, and embarrassingly, 10% of Americans believe that Joan of Arc was Noah's wife. And maybe some of you remember this hilarious scene in 2006 when Stephen Colbert stumps Congressman Lynn Westmoreland when he couldn't name the 10 Commandments, which he was fighting so hard to keep standing in a courthouse in Georgia. Now, this is what we call religious illiteracy, which is when people lack knowledge, sensitivity, and understanding of other religions. Religious illiteracy can also be described as lacking the basic knowledge of the world's religious traditions, the diversity of expressions within a given tradition, and the profound role that religion plays in social, cultural, and political life. Now, whether you're religious or not, whether you even like religion or not, you can't deny that it has been a huge cultural, artistic, philosophical, and political force throughout our species' history. And though you might deny it, religion continues to play a huge role in today's global society. So I think we would be a lot better off knowing a little bit more about this thing that pops up everywhere in our news cycle. Now, studying religion does not mean taking off your critical skeptic's hat. It doesn't mean being indoctrinated or saying all religion has truth to it. We all know that religion is deeply tied to violent episodes all throughout our species' history, and it should be critiqued. But it shouldn't be critiqued from a position of ignorance. So if this is the case, what are the benefits of boosting religious literacy? First of all, religious literacy just makes for a better functioning individual. It eliminates harmful stereotypes like Islamophobia, and it boosts your critical thinking skills, so when a politician says something about religion, you know they're being completely crazy or not. Now this leads to benefit number 2, a better functioning society. Boosting religious literacy aids in social cohesion, how we get along with each other, and how we as a society work together to get over shared problems. And a third benefit, which really is just a bonus, is you get to see how other humans have wrestled with existential questions. Who are we? What can we know? And what is the meaning of life? Now, I don't have any easy answers to fix America's religious illiteracy problem. Religion for Breakfast is here to help, but some scholars have proposed some big changes to public policy. For example, Dr. Stephen Prothero, a professor of religion at Boston University, wrote a best-selling book where he urges at least 2 mandatory religious studies classes in all public schools, one on the Bible and one on world religions. Now, of course, these classes would be teaching religion and the Bible as social phenomena, and not as indoctrination or teaching the religion as true. Now, he argues that teaching the Bible as a text that is deeply entrenched in American politics, and teaching world religions in general will make for a more balanced, tolerant, and effective public. But as we saw with the Tennessee State Legislature, this is a very controversial idea. First of all, is it even constitutional? Now, public school teachers are technically government officials, and the First Amendment of the United States Constitution says the government cannot endorse any one religion. So the fear is, if public school teachers start teaching religion, they are somehow violating their students' constitutional rights. In fact, a 2010 Pew Research study found that 67% of Americans think it is illegal to read the Bible as a work of literature in public school classes. Now, a lot of this confusion stems from the Supreme Court's decision in 1963, Abington versus Schempp, which outlawed public school teachers from reading the Bible devotionally to their students, or leading prayer in public schools. Now, of course, this doesn't outlaw the academic study of religion, though. Justice Thomas Clark wrote, "It might be said that one's education is not complete without a study of comparative religion, or the history of religion and its relationship to the advancement of civilization." So the Supreme Court is definitely on the side of religious studies classes, even though most of America thinks it's illegal. But the second controversy is, religion is just too controversial. Wouldn't public school teachers be a lot more comfortable to avoid talking about Sunnis and Shias? Or to avoid talking about evangelical politics in America today? Because it seems like you just can't talk about these topics without it becoming too personal, either for the teacher or the students involved. But are these controversies a good enough reason not to have religious studies classes? Now, I happen to think it's a great idea. Not only do I run a religious studies blog, but I find religion weirdly fascinating enough to devote my whole career to it. But many of you watching this are rational voting members of democratic societies worldwide. So you should decide for yourself. Is religious illiteracy a problem? And should we encourage more critical and comprehensive religious studies classes in public schools? If not, what alternate ways would you suggest boosting religious literacy? If I get any good answers, I'll share them in the next video. But until then, thanks for subscribing and thanks for watching.
Okay, again, I hope you found that video informative and educational. I particularly thought it was powerful the way he talked about religious illiteracy and considering the question of, is that a problem? Should public schools teach about religion so that we are aware of this issue? Let me go ahead and choose. Doug's the one that teach religion. Teach about religion. To avoid this idea of religious illiteracy across the country and even in the world. Something to think about as we proceed with this topic, and you'll get some great insights from your peers' articles and cultural strategies presentations. But I did put in your course module a guide that looks like this, A Teacher's Guide to Religion in the Public Schools, the First Amendment. So if you want additional information or need clarification on any of the topics we covered today, this is a great user-friendly guide that covers some key information about religion and what you can and cannot do as future teachers. So definitely take time to look that over. And now we're going to kind of end our session for today. One thing I would like you to remember to go do is look at the cultural strategies presentation. Make sure you watch your peers' cultural strategies presentations if you get a chance. They should be posted in their discussion board. I'm also going to post later a guest presentation with one of our Kabrat students from Saudi Arabia, who's going to talk a little bit more in depth about the Muslim religion and education system. So please look for that to be posted later on in your course modules. Thank you guys so much. Have a great day, and I hope you learned a lot about religion.